Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest Global Studio activity. We're getting quite a collection of really interesting skills workshops that we've done in partnership with both AEDE and Supernatural. And so just a reminder that all of those are available on the Global Studio website, and which is just globalstudio.ca. And so just keep in mind that those are there. And I will start with a land acknowledgement. I'm so privileged to look out at a beautiful lake on the lands formerly known as the Salish region of Turtle Island, today known as the interior of British Columbia within the political boundaries of Canada. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a fifth-generation white settler, now living and working as an uninvited guest on the lands of the Secwepemc Nation. I'm a squatter on these lands. The region was not negotiated by treaty and remains to this day unceded. Immediately around where I stay, this includes the people of the Splatcheen, Nisconlith, and Squilax bands. Cooksham, or thank you. A Splatcheen band council member described the Secwepemc traditional lands to me as roughly defined by the Shuswap Lake watershed and occupied since time immemorial by the nation's diverse cultures. There is archaeological evidence of their presence dating back over 15,000 years. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the ancestors and people of these bands for their ongoing inclusive activities towards healing and conciliation, and in their defense of the land, water, and creatures of this region. I also live and work in Igoli, or Johannesburg, South Africa, on Veld, that is the traditional lands of the San and the Sotho peoples. Significant gold deposits were discovered on both of these locations within 4 years of each other in the mid-1850s, triggering colonial mechanisms of land theft, displacement of communities thousands of years old, cultural assimilation, and resource extraction. It somehow was really significant to me to learn that and to realize the global nature of and consequence of colonialism. And it's important for me to just take a breath and think about this before we continue on with the workshop. I'd like to start by announcing the upcoming workshop next week that is on Friday, and then I'll pass it over to Douglas, who will introduce Jessica. So next week's workshop is with Madili and from CPDI Africa, and it is called African Design Philosophy, Community Engagement and Development Practices. The session will focus on how every culture has a place in architecture and teachings to share, specifically identifying ways one can adapt the African community development philosophy and utilize sweat equity in their locality. So I think that sounds like it'll be, and we've had Madili present to us before, and she's doing some amazing work. So I think it'll be a great workshop. But in the meantime, we have a great one today. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Douglas, and to introduce Jessica.
Okay, thank you very much, Kristen. And just before we start in, I just wanted to mention that this Global Studio has actually been an extraordinary success. I think I'm losing count of the number of workshops that we've done, but I think we're up in the territory of 24 or 25, and it's been we've tried all sorts of things, and it's been quite remarkable. Sadly, it will be coming to an end at the end of February, but we're very hopeful that we could apply for another grant and perhaps do even more. In Canada, we do have some things like the partnership grants, which can offer up to $2.5 million over 5 years, which is a significant increase over the $50,000 to $60,000 with which we've done all of these things. So imagine what we could do. The reason I mention that is if you're interested in participating, please let me know. At the same time, we are undertaking a really important initiative to look at the equity, diversity, and inclusion content of many of our courses, which are sadly out of date, I would say. I think this, though, is something that affects institutions all over the world. And again, if anybody wants to work with us in this endeavor, we would be welcome partners. The reason that we're here today, though, is I had Jessica in one of my studios recently, and one day she came in with this extraordinary kind of animation and tool called, and I was amazed at its power, and she identified it as Twinmotion. And Twinmotion, as she'll probably explain, is a spin-off from Unity, which makes a video gaming and virtual reality engine, which is one of the industrial standards. What we're seeing here is a game changer in terms of this software, since it has both really effective rendering capabilities, animation capabilities, and it's like it's blurring the line between rendering software and virtual reality. It also, though, is so fast, and it's got such a great set of material assets that it really is something extraordinary. And as I said, it's free at the moment. So it is a game changer, but at the same time, I would ask everybody who's watching to think about the implications of what it's going to do, because it's also about changing the way that we represent buildings. And as we speed up this process, are we losing the kind of the process of design? Because sometimes it gets really easy to make these buildings. So it is a game changer, but it has implications even beyond rendering. And I'd like to introduce Jessica by saying that, she's been working extremely hard throughout our entire undergraduate program, and her work just keeps getting better and better and better. And here's one of the things that I wanted to share with you, is that we saw her work in Twinmotion and we thought, oh, wow, this is kind of really good stuff. So we hired Jessica to help us with one of our projects in which we're working on a micro-credential, so that we could create a virtual building that learners could explore. We were consulting with another firm to get some of their input into it, and they saw her work and they hired her too. So I'm not saying that Twinmotion is a pathway to jobs in architecture, but for those who are developing portfolios or looking for work, having this in your toolkit is probably not a bad idea at all. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica. But again, thank you, Jessica, for doing this for us today. And also thank you to everybody for coming.
All right, thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Kristen, for the introductions. Douglas, you're totally right. It's the stuff that you can do with Twinmotion is just, I don't want to say easy, but you can make some really impressive stuff. I've been using it for about a year, and I've already learned so much with it. So this is the model that I'm going to be demonstrating today. So I've been using Twinmotion, like I said, for about a year. I've used it through my last 2 studios with Athabasca, and now I'm using it to make renderings for, like Douglas said, for the school, for mindful architecture with some of their projects. So with this workshop, I'm going to take you through some of the setup. We'll import stuff from a couple other software programs. We're going to add some details to this model, show you how I've done some of the detailing in it. I will walk you through some of the renderings that you can do. As Douglas mentioned, it's really easy to do some pretty cool animation stuff as well. And then we'll go through some of the diagramming stuff that I've been doing. So I've been using Twinmotion for about a year, and it's really changed how I work in architecture, in studios, and now as well in actual architecture jobs. I actually found Twinmotion because I was looking for a friend of mine. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the game City Skylines. It's a city building game, and I was looking for a way to put buildings that I was designing in studios into the game that my friend was playing. So I found Unreal Engine and was looking into using that. It's a game development software by Epic Games. And around that same time, I was starting to discover Twinmotion, which was this new program that they were bringing out that sort of channeled a lot of the world building capabilities of Unreal Engine into a specific architecture software. So there's a lot that I wish I had learned earlier in studios, especially the diagramming stuff. It's a really interesting way to convey information kind of throughout the project. I found it really useful in site development, site analysis, which you're probably familiar with. We do a lot of in studio classes. And now that I'm working on actual projects, I've also found it really useful for collaboration. So I'll have meetings with the firm that I'm working with or with the school. I'll load up a Twinmotion model of the project we're working on, and we can actually go through and design it sort of in real time, which has been really helpful. So I'm going to start by giving you a bit of a tour in Twinmotion, kind of get familiar with that. I'm using a brand new version that I think has been out for about a week, Twinmotion 2022.1. So there might be a couple small bugs. I've run into a couple issues. Twinmotion is really great for fixing stuff like that. It really develops really quickly. They're adding stuff to this all the time. One of the biggest changes with the new version 2022 is that it introduced real-time ray tracing, which unfortunately I can't do because I don't have the newest graphics cards. They're kind of hard to get your hands on. But it still really changed the way lighting works. So even when you're doing this in real time, before you're actually rendering and exporting images, the lighting effects are still a huge step up from even the last version. So I really wanted to show this one. They've also added, I think, thousands of new assets, 3D assets and surfaces in this version, just within the last couple of days, which I haven't even had a chance to look through yet. So there's a lot of really exciting changes that happen pretty quickly. So just to get you familiar with Twinmotion, when you open the program, this is what you see. So you have the big viewport on top, and then this menu and detail bar on the bottom. One of probably the most important things to be familiar with is this pop-up menu on the right. When you open it up, it automatically gives you your scene graph. So this is kind of like layers in SketchUp or in Photoshop. And this is where everything that's in your model gets listed, and you can easily turn stuff on and off. One thing to keep in mind as you are using Twinmotion, it is really important to keep this organized. It pretty quickly gets kind of out of hand if you're not organizing it. You can make your own folders to keep things organized in. You can set an active folder so that everything you're putting in the model will be in that folder. It's something that I'm really bad at doing, but it makes a huge difference on how easy it is to control your model and how nicely it runs. Another important thing is this little kind of hidden menu over here. This statistics option shows you how well or how poorly your system is running with all of the assets that you have. So right now I have everything in this model turned on, almost everything. As you can see, it's got a ton of polygons, objects, textures. 5.4 gigs is pretty big for a model of this size. So the frame rate really starts to drop when you've got everything turned on. For example, if I turn off just the grass, which you can't really see from this far away, there's usually a bit of a jump. If I turn off the trees as well, it jumps to a totally fine frame rate. So this is a really good thing to do as you're working. If you don't need all this background stuff while you're just placing things, then you can keep those turned off and it makes a huge difference. But it looks much prettier like this, so I'm going to turn this back on. The other important thing in this menu is the scene states. This is actually new. I've found it a little buggy, so I'm not going to click around too much, but this allows you to set up scenes, basically. with all of the layers that are on and off. So I've got options set up for if I'm doing a rendering in the summer, I've got all the trees that turn back on, some figures that turn on, and I've got a no vegetation option that turns off everything like I just showed you to make it run much faster. So that just lets you flip between those really easily. On the left is where you have all your assets, which I'll get into a little bit when we go into the detailing, but this is where everything that you want to add to your model comes from. So you've got objects, vegetation, materials, as well as some really interesting tools that are available as well. This little burger menu is the all this regular stuff, saving, opening. And then these options are all of the detailing stuff that you can use. So I'm going to start with importing. This is how you add other models to your Twinmotion file. So Twinmotion can connect with Sketchup, Revit, ArchiCAD, Rhino, tons of different software that you might be using for modeling, BIM software. These all connect in the same way, which makes it really easy. It uses a datasmith link, which I'll show you in SketchUp. So this is the terrain that I've got in that file. So to link it with SketchUp, I would create the datasmith file. It's all just in this menu up here. So I export this file, it automatically names it and everything. Then when I go back into Twinmotion, that file, sorry, when I go to add import a direct link, it shows up automatically over here. So I've got a SketchUp file and a Revit file connected, and I'll quickly show you the Revit file as well. It's also got the same option. It still uses that datasmith link. You export the 3D view, it automatically finds it in Twinmotion. And then when you're ready to import the model into Twinmotion, or when you have any changes that you want to make, you just hit synchronize and it changes everything in real time in the Twinmotion model. So this is the Revit model that I'm using. One thing to note here is that it doesn't have any doors. Twinmotion has its own door objects that allow you to interact with the model a little bit. So I'm using those instead of using the built-in Revit door options. And just to give you an example of how that direct link works, if I were to, if I just wanted to see in the model, one way to do that is I can delete the roof or hide the roof, hit synchronize. It will hopefully pretty quickly change this in Twinmotion, and I can go in and look at the model. But I do still want that roof, so I'm going to undo that and bring that back. So that's pretty much all there is to setup. It's really easy to get things from whichever program you're using into Twinmotion. One thing that you have to be aware of is that when you link a model with Twinmotion, the way it handles all the materials is it sorts everything by material. So you can see if I go into the Revit file that it's linking to, it has all of the objects that I've got in the BIM file listed as the material that they're made out of. So it doesn't transfer over all of the BIM data, all of the, the wall materials, everything like that. It only takes the surface materials, and then that's how it organizes them in Twinmotion. So if I'm just making a generic model with everything has the generic surface, it is going to treat that all as one object in Twinmotion. So it's important to keep everything, just to keep that in mind as you're working in Revit or in SketchUp or whatever other software you're using, that it's going to organize the materials and group them all together. So because I just redid the roof, this has that plain white, or the automatic material that it's got in Revit. So now I'm going to get into adding some of the details in Twinmotion. And I'll start with this roof, because I do want to change this material, and this is a really effective way to see how some of the materials work. So Twinmotion has a ton of built-in materials for pretty much everything you could need. A lot of different ground surfaces, tiles, wall surfaces, lots of interesting plastics. It's really fun to go in and kind of play around with everything. It makes it really easy to change how your model looks. And it can be pretty fun and ridiculous sometimes, but I want to keep the roof pretty realistic. So I'm going to go into the roofing options, pick one that's maybe the right color. This one looks pretty interesting, and just drag it over. Sometimes the scale is a little off. I found with this model, everything imports a little bit small. So I'm going to increase the scale. And you can see how easily that really changes the effect of the model. I can also change the reflection if I wanted this to look a little bit shinier. I can change the color if I wanted it to, be a darker gray. You can have a lot of fun with this and just make things pretty ridiculous colors. But I think I want to keep this kind of a standard darker gray for now. If you go into more of the settings, there's really a lot more that you can change in this. So if I wanted to make these tiles look more metallic, I can just turn on the metalness. And then if I go back to the reflection, it changes the way that surface reflects light. Bump is how much depth a material has. So this one does have some depth. Parallax is on, which is the depth effect that it has. Some of the Twinmotion materials are not quite as detailed in this regard. You can see if I turn parallax off, it gets a little bit flatter. Turning it on increases those shadows. So this material looks pretty good for that. But if I wanted something to be, if I wanted it to look even more detailed, Twinmotion also links to Quixel Megascans, which is a huge, huge library of 3D assets and surfaces. And they've also just updated a ton of these in the last couple of days. But for now, I will go into the surfaces. I'm going to look for another roof tile option. So we'll go into roofing, maybe make it look a little older. And I'm going to pick these mossy tiles. So all of these have to be downloaded the first time you use them. They are pretty big, so they do add quite a bit to your model, which is why I've got so many, I think it was 5.4 gigs of textures. So that's good to keep in mind, just it might start running a little bit slowly. But now that this one's downloaded, I'm just going to drag this over. It will eventually process. It's going to think for a while. And these materials usually just have a lot more detail. You can see all the moss between the tiles. It just looks much older, much more detailed than a lot of the in Twinmotion materials. And I think the other thing I want to do while I'm up here, maybe I'll give this a wood edge along the roof. This is back in the Twinmotion materials. There are still a ton of options that you don't have to download. So I'm going to use that red cedar texture and give that roof that wooden edge. And it really, as you change this, it really changes the effect that the model has. That's also a really fun way to play with interior textures. Fly into the interior space. I've just got a regular paint texture on this wall. So if I use this eyedropper, I can select that paint. The plaster coating material that I've got selected shows up here. And then these are all the options that I have to change that. So this is a really fun way to quickly alter not just the color of your model, but really the atmosphere as well. So if I wanted to see, what this would look like with some softer paint colors or really some dark, ridiculous paint colors, it's a really fun way to kind of play with these options. If you're doing a space that's a lot more colorful and vibrant, it's a really effective way to get kind of a different feel for it. But I will leave that as it is for now. While we're inside, I'll show you some of the interior modeling stuff. This is definitely one of the most fun parts of Twinmotion, especially if you are used to playing video games. This reminds me a lot of like The Sims or Cities Skylines, decorating all these interior spaces. So all of these assets live in the objects folder. There are now some more in the Quixel Megascans option as well, but I'm going to stick with the Twinmotion assets for now. So all of this stuff is in the home option. If I go to living room and tables, I'll find all these dining tables. And there are now a ton of different options that you can add. Some of these you have to download as well, now that there are so many. So you can download and choose from those. There are decoration options as well. Lots of different options for paintings, for carpets, for books. Tons of different stuff that you can choose. So just to give you an example, maybe I'll add some more plants to this model. I know it's already got quite a few, but you just click on the item you want to add, click to add it in Twinmotion. You can add it pretty much anywhere. It'll defy gravity and stick to whatever surface you want to stick it to, which can be pretty fun. But for now, I'll just add some plants on the ground as they would normally be around this table. When you click on items, some items have other options. None of these ones do, but I'll show you that when we get to the exterior spaces. Sometimes when you click on an item like these trees, you get more options down in this menu. Trees are a really interesting one because they do have so many options. You can change the age of a tree. So they do actually grow over time. You can make them huge if you want to. And it's a really cool feature for architecture because you get to see how your building is going to change over time. So we were just talking about this earlier before the meeting started, but instead of, you might place a tree close to a building or far enough away from a building that you're designing, and then in 10 years, you might have to cut down that tree because it's blocking your light or getting just too close to the building. So this really lets you see how that's going to change over time, which is a really cool feature. You can also change some of the colors. This changes the tint and not the actual color, so it's not quite as ridiculous as as changing a material color. But there are quite a few options for that as well. And you can change the bark. You can set it to respond to the wind or the seasons, which I'll get into in a second. But while I'm out here, the last thing I think I want to show you is the vegetation paints. So this is a really cool way to add detail to the exterior space of a model. If I turn that off, this is what the vegetation, what the model, the terrain would look like without vegetation. So this is based on two different models. This one is a Twinmotion landscape, and I've got it kind of blended with the imported file that you saw from Sketchup. So this grass texture looks fine. It's not terribly detailed. This one's really flat, and you get this hard edge where they blend together. So using vegetation paint is a really cool way to blur that and to add a lot of really nice detail. So to do that, you go to the vegetation paint option. It's in that context menu. It's automatically going to bring up trees, but you can add any kind of vegetation to this tool. So I think I'm going to stick with grass for now, just to do kind of the effect that it had before. You can pick through all of these different kinds of grasses, weeds, clovers. You can add as many or as few as you want. You have options to change the density. Maybe I want it to be mostly this, nice groomed short lawn grass with a few clovers, a little bit of wild grass. I'll turn that one down a little bit. If you go into more settings, you can also change the size, the color, the dryness, get a lot of variation in those options. And then when you're happy with how that looks, how those settings are laid out, you get this paint tool, and you can just paint across your model and do these huge swaths of grass. So let's do this one along this shoreline for now. I've got it set to get rid of some of the vegetation paint as you zoom out, because that does really have an effect on how the model runs. But if we zoom in, you can see all these details. Sometimes it comes out a little bit splotchy. I found that that's, I think, a little bit worse in this new version of Twinmotion. So that's definitely something that I'm sure they'll improve soon. But once I do click on this painted vegetation, this is still active. So I can still go in and change, I can change the color, the size of everything that I've painted with this tool. So it's a really quick way to add a ton of detail in your model if you're doing exterior spaces. And the last thing I want to note with this, a really cool trick that I found that I wish I'd learned earlier. If you select both the painted vegetation and the surface that you want to paint on, if you go to your scene graph, right click on both of those objects selected and select isolate on and off, it allows you to paint right along the edge. So as you saw, it's a circular tool. It has a little bit of a softer edge so that you get a more natural edge to the vegetation. But that does make it kind of tricky to be more precise with it. So if I was using this big circle to add vegetation right against the building, it's going to show up probably a little bit in the interior spaces. So this allows you to get, you can get pretty close and then go in with a smaller brush size, just change that option there. And you can paint along the edges and get it much, much more precise. And these show up a little bit better when you render them as well. So it will disappear as I zoom out because I've got it set to preserve some of the speed that it has. But even if you can't see it, if you're zoomed out to here, it'll still render with the vegetation. So now that I've got that, I'm going to go back to this menu, turn off the isolation mode. It'll bring everything back up. And now I've got this vegetation that sits really nicely against my model. And it gives you just such a cool detail with the grass against the edge. It makes it look really realistic. So I think that was it for objects. Another really cool thing that's new in this version of Twinmotion is how you can change the sky. So this is pretty much what it looked like before in the old version of Twinmotion. You can use a gradient sky, or there are some options as you change the weather effects. You can change, it'll change how the sky appears cloudy. But now you can also add a sky dome effect. So in the library, I'll click on the sky dome option. I think I want to choose maybe a morning sun. You've got a ton of different options for skies. And they all look really detailed and really quite effective. I'm not sure if I have any of these downloaded. Okay, these ones are pretty big, so I'm going to use one that I've already got downloaded. But you just drag this over into your model. Usually takes a few seconds because it is such a huge file. And then it updates the sky. So from what I had before, just that plain kind of gradient sky, it really adds so much realism to your model. It's a really cool effect. You can change some of the options with it. The intensity is kind of the exposure. It'll make it like brighter or darker. So you can move that slider there. You can have it overriding your model's sun settings or not. I usually leave this off because I like to have a lot of control over where the sun is in the time of day. So if you turn that on, then you're just using the sun, the sky dome sun position and time of day. You can turn it, which also affects the lighting if you have the match sun option turned on. And then you can choose those other options as well. So now that I've got the sky set up, leave that on for now. I want to go into some of the awesome lighting and weather options that you can use for creating renderings. So in this menu, settings menu, this is where you're going to control everything for the renderings that you're creating. Before I get into this really quickly, I'll show you some of the renderings that I've done with this model. This is with, I believe this is with the original sky setting from the older Twinmotion file. This is with one of the newer skies on a darker, kind of cloudier day. And then that's the interior space. So I'm going to go over how I made all of these. I go back to Twinmotion. The first thing I want to show you is the lighting options. These I don't really play with too much. Everything with exposure, white balance, it's all pretty, once you get a little bit farther away from the standard options, it changes pretty drastically. Lowering the exposure, you could make it very, very dark. I find at 0, it's a little bit bright, so I keep it a little bit under 0. You can change the sun intensity, the moon intensity if you're changing the time of day, as well as the ambient lighting. The location options let you control the sun more. So you can change where your model's located, and that'll change the sun based on the time of day and the time of year. This model is actually based in near St. John's in Newfoundland, so I'm going to keep the sun setting there. This is a really cool effect for some of the diagramming stuff that I'll get into shortly. Changing the month or the time of day lets you do some really great sun study diagrams. You can also use this to create different weather scenes. I think this is one of the coolest parts of Twinmotion. It's super easy to change the weather. I can make it, yeah, this doesn't, with the sky dome, it doesn't change the level of cloudiness as you change the weather. So I'm going to turn that off, go back into weather. And then as I move the slider, it gets cloudier and cloudier. And eventually you get precipitation. Leave it there so you can see still a bit of light. You can use this option to make videos or images. If you make videos with this, you get the precipitation falling, which is a really great effect. And then you can also use this slider to change the season. So it goes through fall and through winter. I think it's really useful to be able to see how a design is going to look, especially in winter. And especially here, I'm in Toronto, I'm designing some projects that are in Alberta. So especially for places like Alberta, we're designing, usually we design renderings for how things are going to look in the summer, but we're only getting that weather maybe 3 months of the year. So this really allows you to get a better sense for your model for how a design is going to work in the winter, in the fall, in different weather. It really gets, you get to have a much more holistic sense of how a design is going to work, which is really great. So one more thing on setting up these renderings, you have a lot of different camera options. You can change these from within the renderings that you've set up as well. So I think I'm going to do that. So this is the rendering output option, or these are the renderings that you can create. These are all of the different options that you have. You can do still images, and videos are the ones that I use the most. You can make panoramas. Phasing is really interesting. You can, depending on how you got it linked with your, with a BIM model, you can go through different phases of the design. So if you have a structural model and the finished model, you can set it to go through some of the construction phases, so you can kind of animate how a building is going to go together. There are also presentation options. This is a pretty new feature to Twinmotion. I think it's available in the education version. It's, I don't believe it's available in the regular version of Twinmotion. I think if you're not on the education version, you do have to pay for it. But this allows you to put a design online. It'll host it on a Twinmotion server. So you can send it a link, and anyone with that link can go in and explore the model, walk through it like they're walking through it in Twinmotion. So it's a really cool way to share with, you know, as you're working on a design, you can all be kind of controlling it, or with clients, so they can get a sense of exploring and walking around a model. Like I said, that's a new feature, so I haven't had a chance to play with it, but I think that'll be really, it could be really game changing. So for now, if I go in and if I want to make an image, maybe I want to make a rendering of the outside of this model with the vegetation, with the water. I just choose the camera position that I want. Make sure that I've got everything turned on in my scene graph that I want to be shown in this version. That looks good. And then create image. So now I'm in media mode, now that I've created this image or selected an image. So this is just showing me what this image will look like. If I want to update this, if I wanted to, maybe I want to show this with the figures that I've got here. I click on figures, bring that back up, and then hit refresh on this model or this image, and it'll bring those back up. I think I'm going to leave those off for now. If I go into more, it brings up all of these rendering settings again. So here I can change the lighting again. Maybe I want just this specific image to have less exposure or a warmer level of lighting. I'll bring back that, that sky dome and those lighting changes. If you go into the camera option, these are really effective tools for creating renderings. Field of view, depth of field are really great for interiors, which I'll get into in a second. Parallelism is great for making your renderings look a little bit more realistic. So instead of having it kind of as a 2-point perspective, it makes all those vertical lines parallel. So it looks a little bit more realistic, usually a little bit less skewed if you're looking at a model from far away. So that's a good thing to turn back on for exterior rendering. Vignetting changes the edges of the model, so it'll kind of darken them a little bit. And then if I go into visual effects, this is where you can add some really cool stuff. I could make this a clay model if I wanted to. I'm not sure why it defaults to blue, but if I turn that option back on, select a more appropriate clay color, this model turns into a clay model. So this can be a really awesome tool, especially in studio early in design, if you're kind of exploring like massing and everything. This is a really interesting way to see some of the bigger details. But I want that model, so I'm going to turn that effect off. Filters allow you to also make some really interesting images that you can see here. I'm going to leave all of these off. They take a little bit of time to process, but that's a really easy way to make some cool artistic models. So finally, this option renderer, this is what allows you to turn path tracing on, ray tracing. Like I said, I can't use that yet with the computer that I've got, unfortunately. But if you do have an RTX graphics card, you can do some pretty cool ray tracing effects and make some even more impressive renderings. Shadow is another thing that I'll get into more in depth on the interior renderings. You don't really get as much of a sense on the exterior renderings with the shadow depth. So I think this one is pretty ready. If I go to interior, this is where you get a better sense of the some of the camera tools. You can change the field of view, which changes the depth that you're seeing or how much you're seeing. If I have the depth of field on, this allows you to blur some of the background stuff. So it doesn't work very well if you don't have a really shallow field of view or a narrow field of view, sorry. But if I zoom in more, I can select different points in the model, different distances, and it's going to blur everything else in the model. So this is a really cool effect if you've got a really detailed interior scene. If you have something up close that you want to zoom in on, the space is a little small for this effect, but it's still, you can use this to make some pretty stunning interior renderings. And the other option in here is the shadow. Which I can never find. So if you look at the shadows that are in the scene, if I make them much, much shallower, usually you'll get a lot more detail. So you can't really see it as well in this scene. Maybe with some of these lightings, if you look at some of the more detailed shadows, you might get a little bit more detail if you decrease the shadow depth versus if you increase it. So that can be another really effective tool for making interior renderings. So finally, the last thing that I think I want to show you is one thing that I really wish I'd known more of in when I was in studio. I've been doing a lot of diagramming in Twinmotion with the projects that I'm working on. And this allows you to create some really awesome images. Yep. So I'll go through a couple of the ones that I've done so far. This is a construction model. I wanted to show the structure of this design that I was working on. So I've got this image, this animation with the construction scene. I've also used this to do sustainability diagrams. This one was done obviously with a lot of post-processing in Illustrator. So I used Illustrator to add all of the text, the arrows, all of the information. This was a really cool way of doing, explaining some things in Twinmotion without any post-processing. So this was done just with Twinmotion tools. And this one was as well. So Twinmotion allows you to add these notes, and there's ways to add little details. So I'll show you how I did that. A really effective thing for this to know is how to use the section cubes. These are located in the tools option in section. You select a section cube and you get this cube that sort of cuts a chunk out of your model that you can move around. So I'm going to place that up here for now so we can look into the building. If I can find that again. I'm going to hit tab to select these other options for the cube. And now I can make this bigger. Change the size. Lose it when I select something else. There we go. So this cuts through the model and lets me, here it's letting us look into the model in plan. If I wanted to use this as a diagram, maybe I want to diagram the different spaces that I've got. I'm going to go back to tools, select this notes feature. And this lets me place these note boxes. They are affected by the section cube, which can get really annoying. So you kind of have to play around with where you place these, how you move stuff around. I'm going to place this here for now. If I can reach below this cube, move this into the space. And this is one thing that I'm really looking forward to, the improvements that they make in this. Reach through this door. Here we go. Okay, it's going to bring this note back here. But if I want to label this as, maybe I want to label living room, I can add a description. And then I can move this, have this little button, bring out this menu option. And if I turn off that section cube, I can move this around and create all these different labels for spaces. Yeah, so this is a really cool way to do diagramming if you don't want to use Photoshop, Illustrator. It's a much faster way to do this. So there's lots of really cool things that you can do with this. Another cool thing that you can diagram is, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I use this a lot for site analysis. One of the really effective things that you can do in diagramming is a sun study. So like this video, I've got it starting from about 6 in the morning and going until later at night, until after the sun is set. So you can see the sun tracking all the way across your model. And I'll show you how I set those up. So it can be a really great tool, especially for studio classes. Doing this for every like solstice and equinox, you could do 4 of them, 1 for every season, to really show how the sun changes. So to make these, I'm going to go into the rendering options, create a video. You can choose the scene that you want, the position that you want. Take it from about here again, create a video. And then I'm going to go into the more options on the first section of this video. I believe it's in location data. I think I want to do this one in maybe January. So I'm going to have it start at around 6 in the morning again. Go back to settings. I want to change the weather so that this actually renders in the winter. So I'll bring up the snow, give it some awesome detail, making it snow, which is always just a really pretty effect. So now that I've got those settings, how I want them, I'm going to go back to my video, add a new keyframe. So it's got the same camera position, the same settings. I'm going to go into this second one, into location, change this to be later in the evening. And then if I go back to my video, I've got these 2 parts, and it is automatically going to link them together and make this diagram. Maybe January wasn't the best one to choose. It's not the most, you don't get the most shadows with this model, but you can do this for any month, any time. So that's a really great way to diagram the sun. Another really awesome effect that you can do is diagramming the seasons. So again, I'm going to keep this, update that. So to move through the seasons, I'm going to set the first one to be, we'll do December, do midday so we get better lights. Still a little bit dark because of the clouds. So maybe I'll turn off the snow, brighten it up a little bit. And then I'm going to use the same process, create these new keyframes. And for everyone, I'm going to go in and change the month so that it goes through the seasons. So maybe I'll just do winter to summer. Go in, change that to more of a summer look. And then if I go back to my video and hit play, it'll automatically link those together. So this is one of the interesting bugs. I guess the way it's doing this is changing the month. It's going through a single day for every month that it's got. So if I just go in and change the weather, I can change that to summer. Leaving the months as they are. I'll change this one to winter. And then it should have a better effect of changing the seasons. So there's a lot that you can play with this. A lot of different things that you can tweak. You can change the parts. You can have this kind of zoom around and change the view. But there are a lot of different things that you can do. So I think that kind of covers just about everything. Maybe now we could go to some questions. If anyone has any questions, anything they want to see specifically in Twinmotion or ask about, I'd be happy to answer some questions.
Thanks, Jessica. That was amazing. That'd be great to open it up for questions. We have one question in the chat box, which is from Alan McGuire. You mentioned the phrase design tool. Can this actually generate the building or object from scratch, or must I bring a drawing in from another source?
Yeah, you do actually have to bring in the drawings from another source. I haven't tried to figure out the actual process of this, but I think you'd have to bring in 2 different models. So you'd have like an early, maybe you're using a Revit model, you'd have the structural model and then your final model. And you can link the different models and change how you want them to appear and do it that way. I know one of the kind of limitations that Twinmotion has for now is that it's a pretty one-way communication between BIM software and Twinmotion. So there's nothing you can really change in Twinmotion that's going to affect the model that you've got in Revit or SketchUp. I do know that that's something that they're working on. That's kind of a long-term plan that I think they have at Unreal for Twinmotion. But for now, it's, yeah, you pretty much have to make all the changes that you want in the BIM model and then bring them into Twinmotion.
If anyone else has a question, if you want to unmute yourself, raise your hand and unmute yourself, or if you'd like to type it into the chat. How long, while people are thinking, how long do you think it took you to, like, if today, like I haven't used Twinmotion, if today I'm feeling very inspired from your workshop, how long what's the learning curve as far as like being able to do, say, as you say, some of the things for studio, like the sun modeling and so on?
You know, I found it really easy. I have always been a big gamer, so I I think I just find it kind of easy to use because I'm used to using some Epic Games stuff, but I found it really intuitive. It's really fun to just kind of add things and click around. So I really didn't find that it had a tough learning curve at all. A lot of the stuff that I mentioned, especially with diagramming, I'm just kind of discovering. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of hidden that takes some exploring, but I have found it really, really easy to learn, especially compared to, if you compare it to Enscape or Lumion, which I think are probably the two biggest architectural competitors. It's just so different, so much easier, much more approachable to learn.
I find it interesting. I do some film editing, and there's a familiarity even to just the way that the things are laid out, of how you get the assets, how you make changes. So I find that there's a reminiscence to Adobe there that already makes it feel familiar.
Yes, I found that too when I was learning, especially with the scene graph. It works in a lot of really similar, sometimes frustrating, but very familiar ways.
It's great because it takes away from the intimidation factor because it's such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
Lindsay is asking, she says, I may have missed this, but can you import Rhino models?
Yes, you can. I forget, there's a big list of stuff that you can import from, but I know you can import from all the major BIM programs: Revit, Rhino, ArchiCAD. You can import from SketchUp. I know there's other ones that I'm forgetting. They all use the same method. They all have this Datasmith plugin. So if you go to, I think it's on Twinmotion's website, you might be able to find it in the Epic Games launcher as well. But you just download this plugin, it automatically links the two, and then you can go between whatever software you're using in Twinmotion in pretty much the same way, which is another really great accessible thing. It's really easy to learn.
And to get the software, can you just go onto the Twinmotion website and sign up as a student and get the free version?
Yes, you can. They've changed the way the licensing works a little bit, because they're doing some of the now that they've got a server, they've got all these sort of more just expensive features. You can buy a license for it, but it pretty much works the same way that Epic Games works, which is it's just free commercially. I know with Epic Games, for gaming studios, you pay Epic Games based on the income that you receive from the game that you're designing. So a little indie designer could use it for free, while Activision or Ubisoft are going to be paying them a lot of money. So it really makes it accessible for people who might not be able to use tools like this, which is really cool. A lot of the assets, I think maybe all of the assets, are free as well. If you sign up for Twinmotion, you can also sign up for Quixel Megascans, which I mentioned, for free, and that's got just thousands and thousands of really high quality assets and surfaces.
We're getting lots of thank yous in the chat box, and also a question, Jennifer asking, I wonder if this software works with Chief Architect.
I think it does. I hadn't heard of Chief Architect until I think yesterday, and I saw someone talking about it in a forum. So yes, it does.
Jessica, could I ask, do you think that using this software affects your design process either in a positive or a negative way?
Absolutely. I mentioned that I've been using this to work collaboratively with some other teams. And I think it's really changed the way that all of us design. I'm not sure, I'm kind of used to designing in Twinmotion at this point, but now I'm working with other people who, they might have an idea that they want to see. I can quickly change something in SketchUp, import it to Twinmotion, so we can really see things being rendered in real time as we're designing. And I think that really changes the process. You get a really good sense of lighting and of the site really right away as you're doing like massing models, site studies. So it's a really cool tool for stuff like that.
And could you expand just a little bit about the relationship between Twinmotion and Unity, and whether there's going to, like, this isn't, it's not quite, of course, yet full virtual reality, but it's getting so close. And will do, from your the work that you've done, are you seeing that this is going to become a way of just porting these models directly into Unity?
Absolutely. It's Epic Games that does Twinmotion. I think Unity does have their own. I think they're developing their own. Yeah. But yes, because it is Epic Games, they also have Unreal Engine, which is the main competitor to Unity. They're the two biggest game engines. So every Twinmotion update, it just gets, there's more and more ways to link it with Unreal Engine. So now it's not something that I haven't had much experience with it. It's got a much bigger learning curve than Twinmotion, but you can put a Twinmotion model into Unreal Engine, and then you're basically designing a game with your model. So not only can you, send it to someone who could walk around in VR, you could actually make it so that someone could go into your model, move around the furniture if they wanted to. They could maybe, hit a certain menu option and change the structure. You can tie that in with the presentation mode and the phasing, and how you would, there could be a button that you would press that would change the structure from metal to concrete to mass timber. There are a ton of ways that I think it's going to get really interactive in the very near future, which is really exciting.
Yes, I do apologize. I always get Unity and Unreal mixed up because they're just too close in the way that they're spelt. But I also saw a video in which people were talking about that they may be able to create entire films in these virtual reality engines. And I was sort of responding to Alan's question. What they were doing was they were just pulling in assets from the libraries to create an entire scene, and those assets included like people and characters that they could then add behaviors to. It's going to be a very interesting world when these things become more and more photorealistic and more accessible to everybody. And I have to point out, when way back in the 90s, when we were doing virtual reality at the Banff Center, we had a computer the size of a fridge, which could only generate about 10,000 polygons a second. So if it was rendering this scene that you see now, the trees, for example, would sort of be cones or triangles. Everything would be very blocky and slow moving. That's why, be able to do this on a laptop. Now I do, and I think Jessica does have a kind of a really good gaming computer to do this, but to be able to do this on a home computer is nothing short of remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. When I started using Twinmotion, I was using a couple years old MacBook Pro, and I couldn't do quite as much. Well, it does the same things. It ran pretty slowly, but it was still just miles above anything that I could run on that laptop. Lumion, I think, was the other one I tried. It was super slow and stuttery, and Twinmotion ran slowly, but just fine. So it's really quite approachable, no matter what system you're running.
We have another question from Alan in the chat box. Is there a way to see a person walking through the building as an option?
Yes, this is a really cool option that Twinmotion has. It won't run the nicest. I'll try it now that we're getting to the end, in case my computer crashes, which is a definite possibility. This is a really cool thing that it brought in from Unreal Engine, I believe. You can create, you saw the still and moving characters, the figures that I had down here. So there's animals and people moving around. These are just assets that Twinmotion made. But you can also create a path and have people walking around through a building. it's a little more effective if you've got like a big space, but I'm going to create a path and just see how this looks. So I'm going to start it from out here, going to inside, exploring through this model, and we'll end out in the foyer. And then you can see that based on whatever settings I choose, you do actually get people moving through the model. It interacts with the doors, which is really cool. You can change how many people you've got. So this is really effective for like a background of like maybe an urban setting. You can have like a crowded sidewalk. You can do the same thing with cars. Yeah, and you can just have people walking through. So on this scale, it's a little limited on this scale. You can't really control what they're doing or where they're going aside from this path, but it's a really great option for bigger models.
Going back to the idea of partnering it with other platforms, I was just thinking, you know, we used Trevor's Matchbox software for a workshop a couple of years ago, which is sort of the origin of the Global Studio. But that, for example, would be really interesting to partner with this, so that, because there you could like make a design element change, like change, you know, the orientation or change the envelope material, and then you could see the sort of phenomenological reality of what that means to the character of the space in this model, and that would be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, very much so. And that's actually let Douglas, and I'm not sure how much more we can talk about this, but that is something that we're working on right now. So that'll be a really cool program when we get that running.
Yeah, there is a you know, as the world develops, we're seeing some tremendous opportunities as well in packages like Saphira 2. And as these things become more integrated, the ability to, for example, with what Jessica is doing here, if she changed the material in Twinmotion, being able to update the energy model in Saphira based on that material change, or say she changes the windows from double glazing to triple glazing, that sort of thing would knock us into a whole new ballpark, because being able to interact with the data of the model would be very, very powerful. So I suspect that some of those interactive energy modeling things may be a few years out, but there's no doubt about it that these things are coming.
Yeah, I think what they're working on with Twinmotion is having it so that instead of just communicating one way from BIM software to Twinmotion, you can change it would go both ways. So you could change something in Twinmotion, it would update the model in Revit, and then that would change the energy modeling that you've got going on in Revit. So that is a really exciting feature that I do know that they're working on.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming down, and it's becoming relatively inexpensive too. But I always worry about these things too, because I remember when SketchUp came out, it was open source and it was free. And then over the years, the free version has kind of got more and more separated from the professional version, to the point where it's not really all that useful anymore. You pretty well have to pay for it. So I'm always wary about these things, and how we can best make sure that students have access to these things. But at the moment, Twinmotion being free for students is a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, and the fact that Epic Games has such a great model with that really gives me a lot of hope for Twinmotion as well, because Epic Games is still free for small developers. It's free for anyone to use. So that's, I think, something that hopefully they'll stick with.
Yeah, it does speak to the need, though, over time. One of the things that we're not seeing much of anymore is open source software in terms of CAD engines, BIM engines, and now, of course, virtual reality as well. There's usually a few of them out there. There's things, you know, there's Blender and there's GIMP and other kinds of software, but we kind of need more of these things, I would say, as well. just because
Absolutely.
you'll never know when all of a sudden Twinmotion they're charging for it. It's no longer free. So, but
Yes.
at the moment, it's kind of it absolutely is an interesting. I mean, this, as I said at the start, it is a game changer. To be able to do this kind of rendering that we're seeing on the screen is extraordinary.
Absolutely.
And one of the questions is, particularly for the global studio, is, how could we make sure that students around the world have access to the equipment so that they could create models of different kinds of buildings from their own cultural perspective? And how could we, share those models? But also, and this is something we're starting to explore now, in terms of graphic representation. This is beautiful, but of course, it's a very specific system of graphic representation. I mean, because perspective is very much a kind of a Western cultural development, and all the orthographic projections and all of these things, which are the basis of things like Twinmotion, are really cultural in nature. And how could we expand the framework, expand the thinking about graphic representation to include other forms of representation, maybe ones that aren't quite so rigid as the ones we do now? And again, I'm not trying to plug the Global Studio, but in the new year, we are starting a sketching, an online sketching experience, I think I'll call it, which tries to do exactly that, where we'll bring in different people from around the world to look at how we draw and challenge our conventions about drawing. So I'm hoping that all of these things will continue as a dialogue.
I think that's a really great point, Douglas, and to expand that into to how we model as well. And as you were working through things, Jessica, I was also thinking how this impacts sort of our design process, in the sense too of just the time it takes to, when you have to work over changing, making changes, there is a process of learning as that happens. And so it's interesting to think about the pros and cons of being able to so quickly change, the different aspects of the design, as you've shown us today, which is pretty mind-boggling how quickly you can go through and change. And so I was thinking, like you, Douglas, the combining of the two would be just, probably ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. Twinmotion, as I say, is an extraordinary piece of software, but it also raises some really important questions for us as well as we move forward. They used to, and just as a kind of a sideline to this, with SketchUp, what we started to see, SketchUp was remarkable too when it first came out, because it was an easy and simple modeling tool, but it also was able to create a kind of a barrier between the real world of how a building stands up and what you could do in SketchUp. So often we would see buildings that had been designed in SketchUp that really weren't possible in the real world. But of course, gravity isn't a thing in SketchUp. So probably it will be someday, but it adds another level of distance between the physical object and the virtual object. And that over time will become a pretty interesting dichotomy as they diverge kind of further and further. So there's lots of issues that we could explore on this one.
There's another question from Alan, who says, I'm interested in this to expand my digital drawing I do over photos or my paintings and images in my paintings, or of my paintings. And can you speak a bit to that? Is it possible to import photos, for example? Like, could you photograph a site and import it into the model and have the actual site background?
Actually, yes, you can. So this background here that I've got, you can change the context, which is another thing I can never find. So there's a couple different things that you can use as backgrounds. I know there's a way to make your own. I actually just found this out a couple days ago, but I haven't explored it yet. So yeah, stuff like that you can do. You can pretty much customize almost anything that's in Twinmotion. There is no way to add just an image on its own, but there are a lot of ways to use, Photoshop, Illustrator, or some other software to change assets to use your own images. So yes and no.
Well, but Jessica, wouldn't you be able to import an image as a texture map and put it onto any kind of a surface that you wanted in one of these?
Yes, you can. So for materials, if I wanted to make, my own material, I could select this, go into color and select a new albedo image file. It's actually you can do it super easily and super quickly, but if you want to get a really detailed material, it's a lot more complex than just changing the one file. But there's a program called Mixer that Twinmotion works with that allows you to go in and make all of the different files that you need for a real material. But if you wanted to just do an image, there are other ways that you can sort of paste an image over top of an object.
Alan, I'm not entirely sure I did justice to your question, so you're welcome to unmute and ask Jessica directly as well. One thought I was having, Jessica, is there a way, or is there any, have you heard of anything that they're going to try? The aging of materials in buildings, I think, is something that is always interesting to me. And I'm wondering if there's anything existing or coming up that would allow you to, for example, see this building in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years.
Yeah, that's a great question. Not as far as I know for like automatic aging. I don't think that's, I haven't heard about any plans for that, but there are ways that you can make it look like that. So if you wanted to, you can make a video that slowly increases the, it's called the grunge on any material. So now that I've got these big concrete walls selected, you can see that as I increase this, it increases just the depth of these like stains and wear. And you can do this for any material. So there's a lot of ways to sort of get around stuff like that and make it look like that kind of stuff is happening, for sure.
And would you, for example, be able to add moss on a concrete wall so that like you could show what it looks like when, as just, a newly built stark concrete wall, and what it would look like, say, in 5 years in our climate or 10 years in our climate when it would be covered in moss?
Yeah, I think that's something, that's definitely something that,
stains.
that's something that I think Lumion does better than Twinmotion. I know that that's an option, I think, in there somewhere. In Twinmotion, you'd probably have to add moss as a separate asset to the wall. But there are a ton of new, now that they've got new plants, I know there's a ton of like moss and vine options in here that they've just added a couple days ago. So that's definitely possible now.
Well, the vine one is probably a good one, since they say with climate change, vines are going to be taking over the world. So now we'll be able to model that. Okay, are there any final questions from anyone? I'd like to just say a huge thank you, Jessica. That was you went over an amazing amount in an hour and really showed off the power of this software. So if there aren't any final questions, just a reminder that in the next day or so, I'll have this up in the theater page of the Global Studio website, because I know with such a dense workshop, it's great to be able to go back and look at it again, and actually when you actually sit down to try Twinmotion. So I think if there's nothing else, Douglas, do you have any final words?
No, just to thank Jessica, and to thank you as well, Kristen, for organizing this, and to and certainly we welcome everybody to our next session with Medili on the 27th, Kristen?
26th, Friday the 26th.
Excellent.
And
We'll-
one other thing is this is the first workshop we've had, a skills workshop done by a student. So I'd like to particularly, applaud Jessica for that. But also, if any of you have similar, particular skills that you think you'd like to share, please feel free to reach out. And because we're always looking to get more student involvement in Global Studio. And students from anywhere, we'd love to have you share your skills. So that would be great.
Absolutely. And even if you don't have skills, but you've got an idea for a workshop that you think would be helpful to students around the world, we'd like to hear about it too.
All right. With that, I think we will say goodbye, and we'll hopefully see lots of you next week for the workshop with AEDE. Thanks again.
Thanks,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.